We talk about the subject of influence, but then when you talk about influence, you use two words, salt and light, among others in the New Testament, but today is salt and light. When you use salt and light as representative for influence, what figure of speech is occurring? What concept is taking place to replace the word influence with salt and light? What is going on in the English language? Salt and light are what? They are metaphors. They are metaphors. And what does a metaphor do? It illustrates it. It takes the place of something. Jesus did it all of the time, but Jesus did it mostly, I know I'm talking about what Jesus did right now, but Jesus mostly did it in a longer form. Those we call what? Parables, because it wasn't just a single word or single concept. I mean, it was something much lengthier. So he did use a lot of times metaphors. Why are metaphors effective? Why are metaphors effective? What? Because it's something that you can relate to. Why do you think I chose the idea of the hot air balloon in the sermon? It illustrates a point. And what's the use of illustrating a point like that? To remember, because a lot of people might either think, I've been up in it. So has anyone ever been in a hot air balloon? Okay, so a couple of people. I've never been in one, but I'd kind of like to try it. Do they make them that only go 20 feet off the ground? Because that's more what I'd be into. Because they do go properly 2,000 or 3,000 feet up, don't they? I don't know if I'm prepared for that, but going up a little bit, I might really enjoy. So when you use those, that sticks in someone's mind as something that you've done or something maybe that you're really interested in doing. And salt and light is the same way. Jesus is using illustrative metaphors to try to make a point. And yes, we'll talk about how they are maybe a little bit more meaningful to the people in the New Testament days than they are with us. It doesn't make them less effective in any way, shape, or form, particularly if you're someone who wants to actually understand the point, but it is just slightly different. So that's kind of where we left off last week in trying to understand what are these metaphors. And in order for salt and light to mean what it ought to mean, we've got to step through and talk about the significance of them. So the first point is that salt does what? Salt preserves. So this is where I was actually saying that things are a little bit different than they were back then. And that makes it doesn't make it less meaningful, it just makes it maybe a little bit less identifiable. Why is it that salt as a preservative isn't quite as meaningful to us as it was to them? Okay, now what now? Okay, so how can we do it? Could they refrigerate things? They could do what? They could put stuff in caves. They could seal it up and they could put it underwater, which is pretty good depending on the time of the year. You put it in a cave, of course, and it's always going to keep if what you need to keep doesn't drop below what temperature? I've kind of forgotten. It's in the 50s, right? Caves underground go about in the 50s. That's about as... So yes, they could preserve things, but the main way that they preserved stuff was through salt. That's a hair less meaningful to us today because we don't have one chemical to preserve food. We have... I actually don't know. I would imagine it's in the dozens. Scarily, it might even be in the hundreds. But we've got a lot of different ways to preserve food now that they didn't have. Does it make it any less meaningful? I hope that it doesn't. It shouldn't. But nevertheless, how are we a preservative influence? How can we preserve? How can we preserve? And when you live that way, then what is the result? What is the benefit to other people? It's a great example. It is a great example. And it prevents what from happening? What, James? Okay, it can prevent people losing connection with the Word of God, people losing connection with God Himself. It can prevent the decay of what? Yeah, the truth, the church. It can prevent the decay of society in general. It can prevent the decay of society in general. That's a tough one, though. And we have to determine as a society and as an unbelievably diverse society, we have to make those determinations when it comes to civil law as to how much that civil law is going to apply to divine law. And we have ideas in our head that we would love civil law to probably greatly mimic divine law, but not everyone feels that way. And we live in what kind of government? A democratic type of government. So we're not the only ones to get to make that decision. But when we, as individual citizens who have the right to live as we want to live, when we do live and uphold a standard of godliness, and we will do it imperfectly, we all accept that, but by and large, when we can live up to a standard of godliness, what will happen to everything else around us? It'll be influenced for the better. I wish I could say definitively that it would be better, but that's optimistic, right? That's optimistic. It most definitely can be better. Here's the funny part about the way influence works. When you have good influence, and I'll say society, but I mean society meaning your own family, I mean your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your parents, your children. So your community, and that could mean neighbors and coworkers, with godliness, they can be what? They can be better. They can be better. Again, everyone's got to live up to their own decisions. They can be better. With a bad influence, they will most definitely all be what? Worse. They'll all be worse off. Do you see what I mean? That's how influence works. If you give a bad influence, almost exclusively, everyone's going to be worse. If you have a bad influence, there is at least what? A chance, there's hope that people can be better. It has a preservative effect like that. We brought up last week just a few instances in the Bible where people were saved by just a handful. Talked about Abraham trying to save Sodom and Gomorrah with just a few people. King Josiah, great person, saved a lot of people from destruction. He held it off. And I had mentioned through the reigns of some kings, but you also have to put that in the context of multiple generations didn't have to go into captivity because of the righteousness of that single person. Okay. Yes. Yeah, that's true. It not only preserves it for, food consumption, but it can preserve it for it being something very useful Yeah, that's exactly right. Giving flavor. Giving flavor. Again, thinking about this righteously, how is your influence giving flavor to the world? Through what? Okay. And on a day like today, why is joy and hope needful? Not because of the weather. I almost said it's not because of the weather, and then James said it's because of the weather. It's actually not because of the weather. Why is that? So take away the religious element of Christmas when I say this. We really only have a couple of days where we think about gift giving, don't we? We really only have Christmas and what? Birthdays. Now, multiple people around you have birthdays, so yes, that compounds into more than just 2 days. But still, out of 365, how many days are purely oriented toward giving to someone else? Not many. I mean, am I the odd bird out? I kind of wish we had more days that were just oriented to giving. I think that would be a good thing. So how can we give flavor to the world? So Teresa had meant the joy and hope. So how's that accomplished? You have to what? You've got to give something, don't you? Now, what can we give? Let's go ahead and make sure that when we talk about giving, giving is not only limited to something money. It's not limited to something financial. It's not just limited to a gift that's purchased for someone else. In fact, the most meaningful gifts often are the ones that you don't have to pay anything for. Those. I've got a stack in my desk at home of the kids. So all the kids, as they're growing up, would write me little notes. Thank you, Mr. Kyle, for the lesson, and they draw me at the pulpit. Some of them were a little bit critical. I thought, are they really taking fair shots? But anyway, I've kept all of those. Didn't cost them a penny. Didn't cost anybody a penny. In fact, they could have went back here to the copier and gotten the paper for free. Didn't cost them anything. But those mean the world to me, so much so that I've kept all of them. And the things that mean the most to us sometimes don't cost anything. And we can literally be influences that give an incredible flavor to the world of joy and of hope when, let's be honest, most of the world feels really what? Really, really down, dark, really distressing. There's reasons for that. We open up our news apps, and when we open up our news apps, most of that news is what? Negative. How much is it? How much is negative, actually? About 90. It's funny you said that. I've seen statistics that place it at about 90%, and you think, well, that's so terrible. Unless you're someone that produces news, and then you know the secret. And the secret is, whether you tap on it or you watch it on television, negative stuff, what? Negative stuff gets the views. It gets the taps. It gets the clicks. It gets the, well, I've run through everything. It gets all of that, the negative stuff. Why is it? I think it, there's a psychology behind it that's irrelevant to us. But the fact of the matter is, we all consume this. And some of us consume it every day. Some of us probably consume it too much. So there's kind of this necessity to be a flavor that's joyful and that's hopeful, that's different than something that's purely carnal. And as a salt, that's what all of us can be. And that is such a worthy and such a incredibly noble thing to do, because salt can also create thirst. Salt can also create thirst. Thinking about it spiritually, the way that you live, the way that you conduct yourself, what is going on in your relationship with other people? What are you doing?
They may see the way that you're acting, the way that you live your life, and maybe they see you as having a more successful life because of the joy, and that makes them want to know what's your secret.
And I'll only add one tiny word to that. They're not only seeing how you act, but they're seeing how you react. And how can adding a single word change that, make us really truly understand how important it is to create thirst? People are seeing what? They're seeing everything, because they're seeing that humanity in general all have pretty much the same problems. And how we act with those problems and how we react with those problems can cause some people to be inquisitive about it. I wish that it could cause more people, but that's just the way it is. But it can cause people to be inquisitive. Jesus pronounced, this is Matthew 5, Jesus pronounced a blessing on people who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And can you not imagine that there's a blessing on people who produce people who are hungering and thirsting after righteousness? So you need to think about creating thirst. One writer said, "We are set aside, but not shut off. We are sanctified, but we are not secluded." Okay? So this is what salt does. It preserves, it gives flavor, and then it creates thirst. But the other side of that is what? Salt and light. So now we need to talk a few minutes about light. What does light represent? Because light is a symbol in and of itself, just like salt was a symbol, but light definitely more so. Why is light more of a symbol than salt? Right, and someone who is walking in righteousness in the Bible is not walking in salt. They're walking in what? They're walking in light. That's why light is a much more pervasive image than salt is. Salt's necessary, but light is far, far more used in the Bible. So what does light represent? Glory? What, James? A path, okay? That's kind of getting down to it. Light represents truth, really. And so if you think of light, kind of putting all of you guys' thoughts together, if you think about light as the pathway of truth, then that's also going to be a pathway of glory. That will be ultimately a pathway of reward. So that's what light is. And just to think about one little specific place, let's go to Psalm 119. Go to Psalm 119. Because what does, all of you guys who are familiar with Psalm 119, what does Psalm 119 almost exclusively talk about? Psalm 119. Yeah, the Word of God. So what does Psalm 119 and looking in verse 130 say? Okay, remember the nature of Hebrew poetry. So it gives what? It gives light, but then I come back and I ask the question a second time. It gives light. It gives what? Understanding. So light is understanding. So look at, of course, and you probably know where I'm going to go, 105. Verse 105. What does verse 105 say? Okay, a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Now, in thinking about this, let's go back to Matthew chapter 5, because when you look at both salt and light, there are some additional comments made on both of them. So Matthew chapter 5 and verses 13, and let's look in verse 14. You're the light of the world. A city that's set on a hill cannot be hidden, because you literally can't do what? You can't hide it. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. And I just wanted to make a comment. Just like salt maybe is slightly less impactful to us because we've got a lot of preservatives, there's something similar to light, especially in the 15th verse. Okay? So we all have what today? Verse 15 talks about light in relationship to a what? A lamp. We all have what? We have what? We have, whatever you want to say, we have light bulbs, we have electricity. We even have, flashlights. We've got our phone light. I don't know when the last time I've used a flashlight. I always use my phone. Still, a phone and a flashlight still run off the same electrons. The point is, for us, having a light, it's just what? It's taken for granted. It's natural. It's instant. We pay a bill once a month, and we have it. We didn't have, out in Hudson, our street was not a, it wasn't a, so we learned that until the street is fully built out, and you guys tell me if this is wrong, because I'm going to be really mad if this is what the city's told us all these years. Until the subdivision is built out, the city has no responsibility for lights and stuff like that. They have basic responsibility for sewer, water, electricity, but not for street lights. So we all banded together and we put street lights on the street. And the reason that I bring this up is that it's time to pay the bill. So every household pays a bill every year to keep the lights running. And we've got a little annual report, and we've got a few $100s to cover bulb replacements and people coming out and doing that, because I am not getting on a ladder to do that. So it was so neat because it was dark out there, it was dark out there before the lights came along. And then when it gets dark, I think at 5:20 now for the time being, but it's getting lighter every day now. Do you know that? I told Ramsey that yesterday. Now it's technically going to get lighter every day. Now we have the opportunity to see on the street, and it just happens, and we just take it for granted. Back then, what did you have to do? So you had to have a lamp, and that lamp had to have what in it? It had to have oil in it that you had to get from somewhere. And then you also had to do what with it? Somehow you had to figure out how to light it. And I would imagine that there were times and days and circumstances where in your household, lighting a lamp was kind of a what? It was kind of a big deal. So I think the point that Jesus is making, if you go to all of the trouble of lighting a lamp, you're not going to what? You're not going to put it under a basket. So we just turn the light on and it's instantaneous. And when we want to leave the room, we just turn it off. All of the dads know what I'm talking about. You got to teach your kids, when you leave the room, what do? You got to turn the light off. We're civilized people. You leave the room, you turn the light off. And it's just instantaneous. It doesn't matter. It's not as deeply meaningful. When you lit a lamp 2,000 years ago, it was a big deal. The last thing you did was stick it under a bushel. So think about that in relationship to what we talk about with light. So what is light? So first of all, light reveals and light illuminates. When we think about it with biblical understanding, what does light do? What is it? I think a way to put it, it explains things. It explains things. I say the word things. The biggest thing that it explains is life itself. Isn't it? Wouldn't you think? What's the biggest thing that truth explains? It's kind of that what life's all about. I'll bring that up just a tiny little bit tonight. It's when you look at things that are, by the way, when you look at things that are vain in the Bible, there's actually quite a bit of them. Definitely far more than a normal length lesson could handle. So there's a winnowing process to try to figure out which would be the most interesting ones for us to study. But one that I'll close with is that it explains life and everything about it. It reveals it. It lets us understand it. It lets us comprehend why we're here and why it's important. That's what light does. Light also drives away darkness. When you think about driving away darkness, look in John chapter 3. Look in John chapter 3 and verses 19 through 20. And what does John 3, 19 and 20 say? John chapter 3, 19 and 20.
This is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, for fear that his deeds will be exposed.
So why do people not love the light? Yeah, it reveals the darkness that's within them, and that's using it in a very philosophical way. What's actually internally what's within them. When you think back to it physically, John was really good at this in the gospel, in his letters. He wrote in absolutes. So if you have darkness there, and then you introduce light to it, you don't have what anymore? You don't have darkness. And so as he writes in a very binary way. It's light or it's darkness. Light is always going to chase the darkness away. And is that necessary? Yeah, absolutely necessary. In thinking about it more effectively, how can you think about your light driving away darkness? How can you think about your light driving away darkness? Because you have an influence, and that influence ends up manifesting itself in different ways. Might even manifest itself tomorrow. So how can your light, in some small way, kind of drive away the darkness? It can do that. And that's on a big scale. Let me just tell you what I was thinking about. There's times where we've went with family and we show up, and this is... Ginny and I's family are evenly split among people who, believe and follow the Bible and people who don't. Now that Ginny's, mom and dad are both passed away, it would tend to skew toward those who don't. I would think that's accurate, more toward those who don't. But if, when Ginny and I show up, they're like, oh, well, Kyle's a preacher. We're going to ask him to do what? Say a prayer. Which in other circumstances, fairly, may not happen. So do you see how in just little ways you might have the opportunity as you live to kind of chase away the darkness? Saying a single prayer, I'm under no pretense that saying a single prayer is going to radically alter someone's life. But the cumulative effect, hopefully, is something that can turn someone back to the light again. And all of you guys live with relationships with maybe children or grandchildren, where you get these little specks of light. And these little specks of light are reminders for other people to drive them back to light. And that's what light can do. Light can drive away the darkness. And that's, I think you always think, ours is not to question why, ours is but to do or die. You don't need to be questioning what? You don't need to be questioning what? As I go to say a prayer, or as I use good language at work, and then you kind of show up in the group of people, and all of a sudden they stop saying dirty jokes or they stop cussing because someone's here now and they're a Christian. We got to stop that stuff. You're driving away the darkness. Ours is not to question why. You don't ruminate in your brain all of the time, am I what? Yeah, am I a light? Or maybe more importantly, am I doing any good? Ours is not to reason why. Ours is just to what? Ours is just to do it. Just do it. Just when you get to present yourself as a holy priesthood in the kingdom of God, just do it, and do it over and over again. And don't worry about what. Don't worry about the result. You've got one job, and what job is that? To do it, to shine the light. It's their job to react to the light. And I pray that they will, because a lot of it's just, I know it's more than, I understand that it's more than just me standing up and saying words. Because we're all of the ones, and I include me within it, we're all of the ones who have the children and who have the grandchildren and who have the mom and dad who we desperately want them to be back in the light. And all these things that we do, you're just hoping and praying, can I bring them back closer to the light? So you can drive yourself to the point of incredible discouragement if that's all you concentrate on. Just do it. Just do it. Let them be the ones who react to the light. You just do what you're supposed to do. Because light dispels darkness. It drives away darkness. Light also, if we think about it, thinking about it in more of the metaphorical usage, light also gives guidance. Because what do you need? You need a light to be able to see the path. Yeah, to see the path. Right. It's Christmas time, and maybe a tree is up, and maybe presents are under it. And because the tree is up, all the furniture is rearranged. This is how my house has been for 31 years. So I come through the house at night, and it's dark. Guess what I do? I bang into stuff, because stuff isn't where I thought that it was. Once Thanksgiving comes along, all bets are off. And without light, I bang into stuff because I got no what? I got no direction. I've got no guidance. So if someone is wondering, how do I handle this situation? How do I handle that situation? Where can they go? They can go to the light, and they can go to the eternal light. Can that, and this is for all of the benefit of all of us who have to deal with family or have to deal with people that are close to us, friends or what have you. Can the light change their circumstance? Can the light change their circumstance? Can the light change their circumstance? It can certainly change how they handle it. Why might someone, they see you, they see the hope that you have within you, what might persuade them in their life to come to you and talk to you about handling something in their life? What might be the determining factor? Yeah, but think about it. Think about it in a specific circumstance. Maybe someone comes to you and they want to talk to you because their husband's just been diagnosed with what? With cancer. I told you about, I don't even know if I've had the opportunity to talk to Ramsey about the Thomases at West High Street in Woodbury. He's about 45 and he's been diagnosed with glioblastoma. So James and Donna, and we all know, or we probably all know, what a diagnosis of glioblastoma means. So if someone were to come to you with that news that they're experiencing with their loved one, can the light change that? The light can't take away what? The light's not going to take away the cancer, but the light can what? The light can comfort, and the light can give hope. What can the light do to someone who's maybe in their last months of life on earth because of sickness? It can give peace, and it can even turn people to the light. Yeah, it can turn people to the light. And that's why I asked the question, can the light change a circumstance? Sometimes it can. Sometimes it can. If you're talking to someone who's a drug addict, can the light change the circumstance? Yeah, it absolutely can. If you're talking about someone who has a terminal illness that's just a few months out from death, it's probably not going to be able to change that circumstance. But it can change the way that they look at the end. It can change the way that their family kind of processes what takes place. And that becomes incredibly relevant to them. That's what light can do. Yeah, absolutely. It can change the spiritual part of how they handle that situation. Yeah, that's exactly right. Light can also warm and give comfort. So look in Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 7. Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verse 7, because this is a passage that I haven't used very much. I knew it was there, I just haven't used it very much. And because I haven't used it very much, you may not be as familiar with it as you should be or as you could be, but probably as you should be. What does Ecclesiastes 11 verse 7 say?
Truly the light is sweet and a pleasant thing. It is for the eyes to behold the sun.
Okay. We like looking at what? Yeah, we like looking at sunshine. Can't technically look at the sun, but we like looking at the sunshine. One of the great things about Texas is that we have a day like this. Tomorrow might be like this, but I can almost guarantee you Tuesday will be like what? Probably will be sunny. Or, I may have the sequence slightly altered. But if you live up in the north, Jenny's from Indiana, it turns cloudy in October, and it pretty much doesn't change until March. You talk about the seasonal affective disorder. You talk about having that, you can have that in any place that's in the north. Here it's much nicer. We get bad days, but usually they're followed by pretty good days. Light is what? What did Solomon say? Light is what? It's pleasant. It's the New King James Version. I like the New King James Version. It said light is sweet. We want to what? We want to be in the light. We want to look at the light. So light can warm and light can comfort. Again, when you think about darkness and events in your life that bring darkness, what can light do with that? While not sometimes physically changing the circumstances, light can do what? It can move away some of that darkness that follows along with it. Okay, let's just talk about one more thing, and then next week we'll discuss just for a few minutes about maintaining our influence, then we'll move on to the next lesson. Light can draw those who want to come out of the darkness. Again, John chapter 3 and verses 19 through 20. What did John chapter 3, 19 through 20 say? Let's go back to it. John chapter 3, verses 19 through 20. This is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and that men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds are what? Evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. So people who come to truth come to light. Light can draw people. Light can draw people. It's got that effect. Light draws people who wants to come out of darkness. So people get into sin because sin is what? It's what? Sometimes it's easy. Most of the time it's actually pretty what? Yeah, it's enjoyable. People get into sin because sin's pretty fun. Amanda's correct, though. It's also actually quite easy. But you get into it and you realize that what drew you into it is what? Not as fun. Not as fun. For a variety of reasons. So therefore, some people, and unfortunately only some people, I wish it were all people, but only some people, at some point realize they need to what? They need to get out of it. Because what was fun and what was easy is no longer fun, nor is it easy anymore. So they want to come out of it. So they come to the light. So what's going to be the visible representation to them? Because it'd be easy for me to just say, oh, well, go and read your Bible. But what are people more than likely going to do? Yeah, exactly. They're going to go to you, and they're going to go to you, and they're going to go to you, and they're going to go to you. Because you're the visible represent. Just like Jesus was the visible representation of who? Of God on the earth. We're all visible representations of Jesus Christ on the earth. And that's what people are going to be drawn to. We got to make sure that we're worth it. And that's going to be our concluding comments next time as we move on into the final lesson.